Our next speaker is Denise Gitsham, and she is actually a political commentator. So she speaks, and she speaks about politics, which, she's an author, she's a speaker. She was born and raised at Travis Air Force Base in Northern California. Her mom is a Chinese immigrant who fled from communism, and her dad is a Canadian immigrant who served in the U.S. Air Force. She herself is a political veteran with over 25 years of campaign experience at federal, state, and local level, in addition to practicing law on K Street and running for Congress herself. She's worked in the White House, the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. Department of Justice.
Inspired by her favorite verse, "To whom much is given, much is required," please give a warm welcome to Denise Gitsham.
Well, good morning, ladies. I just want to level set expectations. I don't know if you saw what Dan did up here, but he was doing this thing. I can do it too, but I'm not gonna. That was it. That's it. No more of that today. Dan's very, very flexible, which I actually didn't know about him. So yeah, actually that felt really good. It's morning stretch. Thank you, ladies, for that incredible introduction. I get hating politics. I wrote a book about it. And I just wanted to thank one person in particular this morning, my husband, Jeff. He's in the back, one of the conspicuously few men in this room. He actually inspired the title of our talk today, which is, Be You. You see, all my life, I've just wanted to be something better, somebody different. But I am literally the luckiest woman in the world because my husband reminds me every single day that the very best thing that I can be is the person that God created me to be. This picture, that's a picture of the whiteboard that he put up in my office. And that's his handwriting. And it says, "I love you. Be you." I see it every day when I'm sitting at my desk because he knows how often I have to be reminded of that very simple but profound truth. But before we dive in, I just gotta tell y'all, I am so happy to be back in Texas. I just love me some Texas women. I think y'all scare the crap out of most people. But I think you're the strongest and the smartest and the fiercest women I have ever met. Really, truly. I spent a lot of time in Texas, and I just love Texas women. You know, from Jane Long, who is called the mother of Texas, this is a woman who literally held down a fort. During the Texas Revolution, she was firing cannons and waving a red petticoat while pregnant and taking care of a toddler. And that's a Texan right there. To Bessie Coleman, she was the first African-American woman to ever earn a pilot's license. To Beyonce, Sasha Fierce herself, who actually has won more Grammys than any musician in history. Y'all Texas women, you're in a league of your own. And I love this part. I love that if you ask a Texas woman to describe herself, at the top of your list, you'd say, "I'm a Texan." You just have so much pride in your state and where you're from. And honestly, as a Californian, I'm a little jealous. My love affair with Texas started back in August of 1999. It was literally one of the hottest summers on record. And I drove across country in my Ford Explorer with my dad from my college campus in Maine to Austin to work on then Governor George W. Bush's presidential campaign. In Austin, I fell in love with Tex-Mex. I'd never had it before. I now drink queso by the bowl. And I also fell in love with politics as I interned for 8 long, unpaid months, sending faxes, making copies, and getting people's lunches. It wasn't very glamorous, but I loved it. And that's probably because I wasn't like all of the other interns on the campaign. You see, I'm a daughter of immigrants, and everyone else came from really politically connected, well-known families. Names that if I mentioned, you'd probably recognize. So I knew that I was super blessed to have this opportunity, which made me work harder than all the others. I spent nights and weekends working 24/7 at campaign headquarters. And then I had to work shifts at the powerhouse gym down the street to pay for my very expensive political habit. Eventually, though, months of working 24/7, they just exhausted me. So I finally mustered up the courage to ask my boss for a full-time paid position on the campaign. A few weeks later, he called me into his office. He said, "Denise, I have created the perfect position for you." I couldn't believe my luck. "What is it?" I said. He looked at me with this big grin on his face, and he said, "It's really good, I promise. It's worth the wait." Babe, can you switch the slide? I don't want to blow it. Y'all. Oops. There's a little preview. Denise, you're going to be the new Hispanic coalitions coordinator. I don't know why y'all are laughing. Listen, he looked at me and he was genuinely excited, and he expected me to come back with just as much enthusiasm. I tried not to let my confusion show, so I blinked really hard, and I took a moment to compose myself before responding, "Gracias, señor." You see, my boss had never met my parents. I literally showed up on the campaign doorstep like an orphan. So there's no way that he could have known what I knew and what 23andMe confirmed decades later, that I'm 50% white, 50% Chinese, and 0% Hispanic. I didn't blame him, though. I understood why he thought I was Latina. Look, I am as ambiguously ethnic as it gets. And in my desperation to be legit, I embraced my new role with so much gratitude. I fell in love with the Latino community as I led 28 states of Hispanic outreach, fighting tooth and nail for signs that read, "Viva Bush!" I traveled all over the country representing President Bush, and I met with national Latino leaders and even worked closely with George P. Bush, his half-Mexican nephew. Naturally, everyone I worked with assumed I was Latina, and they called me mija. They spoke to me in Spanglish. I understood about half of it. And they treated me as one of their own. So after months of walking, talking, and politicking like a Latina, I actually kind of forgot that I was Chinese. I let my job, my colleagues, and my new career brainwash me into believing that I was somebody that I actually wasn't. Being a fake Latina literally became my identity because it was the only thing that I was known for in my new political world. So, this delusion, eventually, it came to a screeching halt. When in January of 2001, I attended President George W. Bush's inaugural ball in D.C. with my parents. Since they were my guests, they attended all of the events with me, which genuinely confused my campaign colleagues. Nobody knew what that cute little Chinese woman was doing standing next to me, or that handsome white man was doing looking at me oh so proudly. Sheepishly, I had to explain to them, these two were my very non-Latino parents. And in that moment, the spell was broken, which left me wondering, who am I really? You know, my identity was so wrapped up in what I'd done on the campaign that I'd actually forgotten who I truly was. Which makes me wonder, have any of you ever experienced this before? Maybe you took a job, maybe you picked up a hobby, maybe you signed up for a political party that became such a huge part of your identity that you lost sight of who you actually were. An example from my world of politics is that people who are truly wonderful human beings, they can turn into full-blown psychos, on social media especially, when they identify too closely with a party or a candidate. And it's all because they've bought into an identity that isn't actually who God created them to be. As a political commentator, I find myself getting sucked into this trap all the time. I feel the tension between speaking God's truth on TV and saying what the network's actually paying me to say. And once I go down that wrong path, it's really hard to backpedal, especially when I'm being praised for being someone other than who God created me to be. Sadly, I see this in the church too. When good, God-fearing people say the nastiest things about politicians they don't like, and they would even justify doing so. It's a classic case of forgetting that we are all ambassadors of Christ first, and everything else, everything, is a distant second. This is a phenomena, however, that I am sadly way too familiar with, because the campaign trail wasn't actually the first time I'd fallen for a case of my own mistaken identity. You know, I've been confused about my true identity ever since I was a child. Being raised by a tiger mom. You guys know what that is? Chinese tiger moms? If not, look it up. I was told I had to be the best at everything I did, and that love had to be earned. So I became the perfect student, a classical pianist, and a beauty pageant queen, some of which I loved, some of which I hated. Nobody likes playing piano. And none of which had to do with discovering anything about who God created me to be. Then in high school, that trend of achievement, it just continued. I was voted prom queen, most likely to succeed, class president. But since I learned to be such a people pleaser from childhood, everything about my orientation was external. My identity was solidly rooted in what others thought about me. It wasn't until I met Jesus in high school that I'd ever even heard that I was loved for who I was, not what I did. But my heart and my brain were so wrapped up into thinking that I was a human doing, like Dan was talking about, instead of being a human being, that I actually couldn't embrace wanting to discover who God thought I was. My identity crisis further deepened in college. I don't think Dan would have liked me in college. When I took on an entirely different identity as a party girl. I lived a crazy double life, partying 5 nights a week while still going to church on Sunday. I was never more miserable or confused about who I actually was. So I tried reinventing myself again in Washington, D.C. when I became a White House staffer at the age of 23. My new identity became totally wrapped up in my job in a city where people are notorious for asking, "What do you do?" before they ever even get to asking, "What's your name?" This identity crisis continued for decades until, by God's grace, my whole life imploded. Oops. I'm not very good at this. Oops. All right, y'all. This part's really hard for me to talk about. I have a friend sitting out here, Joanne, who saw me through most of this year. On New Year's Eve, 2020, it was a 75-degree, perfectly sunny San Diego winter day. I was hiking in Torrey Pines Park, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and talking to God about the new year. I was making more money than I'd ever made in my life. And just months earlier, my biggest client told me, as long as you want to work for us, Denise, you have a job with us. So I had job security. It was incredible. But by the end of that hike, literally as I was walking to my car, that very same client called me and informed me that their headquarters had been raided by the FBI. They were being investigated for Medicaid fraud, and they said, "We can't pay you anymore, Denise." My mind and my heart raced. I had no backup plan. My then husband was a federal prosecutor, and his whole monthly paycheck couldn't even cover our monthly mortgage. The next 6 months of my life were the absolute worst. From January to July of 2021, I lost my career, my house, my car, my independence, what I believed was my last chance at having children, my marriage, and very nearly lost both of my parents. My mom was 81, and she nearly died in surgery in that time. And on the day she came back from the hospital, my dad fell and broke his back. I ended up taking care of both of my parents around the clock, and in that time, I miscarried for the 4th time in 23 months. And then I found out this zinger. My then husband, not this husband, the then husband, had switched behind my back from prosecuting cartels, like, narcos, drug cartels, to working for them. To say that my life had imploded is a vast understatement. Every single identity that I clung to, whether it was wife, businesswoman, homeowner, daughter, and would-be mother, everything slipped through my fingers. Survival became my only goal. There were no more pretenses to be had. I had no clue who I was, and I'll be honest, at times I questioned who God was to me. For the first time in my entire life, at the age of 44, I could not answer the most basic question of all. Who are you? The only glimmer of hope I had came from this framed quote that someone, I don't even know who, gave to me in my 20s. It reads, "There will come a time when you believe everything is finished. That will be the beginning." I'd had this quote, I'd carried it with me everywhere I moved. It was always in my office or my bedroom, but it never really meant anything until that moment because I actually believed that everything was finished. As I prayed with the weakest faith I'd ever had, God fixed my eyes on this quote, and he told me to prophetically declare it over my life. I couldn't have known it then, but from the ashes of my former life, God was about to bring forth something utterly transformational, a new understanding of who I truly was, rooted in my God-given identity. You see, the devil loves to distract us with all sorts of fantasies about who we actually are. From the moment we're born, he puts a target on our identities to make us question our God-given value and worth. He knows that if we can just get us to buy into any identity other than the one God speaks over us, he can keep us from fulfilling our God-given purpose on earth. And he's really slick about it, ladies. He never comes at us with a pitchfork and a little red latex suit. Instead, He worms it into our psyches by trying to get us to question whether God can really be trusted. And he loves targeting us, ladies in particular. You know, it all started with Eve in the Garden of Eden when he slithered up to her, and asked this seemingly innocent question. Did God really say? He didn't say, eat the fruit. He didn't say, God is such a buzzkill. He didn't even say all the cool kids are doing it, because there were no other cool kids in the Garden of Eden. He just made Eve question God's intentions, which made her question her identity, her value, and her worth. Because think about it. All that Eve knew about herself at that moment was what God had told her. It was just, there was no gossip girls, whispering about her behind her back. It was just her, Adam, and God kicking it in the garden. And yet, the devil worked his black magic just enough to make her disobey God. Because isn't all sin really, at the core of it, rooted in an identity crisis? When we believe that we're less than who God says we really are, we tend to act that way too. This devil, he's repeated this playbook billions of times ever since. And he's probably done it to you too. Just think about it. How many times have you caught yourself wondering, does God really love me? I know I have. Can he really be trusted? Oh, I ask that a lot. Am I really who God says I am? All the time here. The devil spends all of his energy trying to convince us that the answers to all of these questions is no. So for the rest of our time together, ladies, I'm going to share exactly with you how I fight back, and you can too. Let's start by addressing one of the deadliest pitfalls that we all fall into at times, the comparison trap. It's hard to avoid, isn't it? The media uses airbrushed models to tell us what an ideal woman should look like. The church tells us how godly women should behave. I'm not sure I always agree with it. And social media inspires us to keep up with more than the Joneses. Today we have to keep up with the Kardashians. Comparing ourselves to all these role models does something truly, terribly detrimental to our identities. It fixates us on defining ourselves based on comparison to others instead of who God created us to be. It also explains why 80% of women struggle with not fully accepting themselves. 80 to 90% of women report dissatisfaction with their bodies. 70% of women feel like they're just not good enough. And 50 to 60% of women report that they have low self-esteem. And women aren't the only ones who fall prey to this trap, as the Old Testament Israelites proved. Now, these guys had been told literally their whole lives that they were God's chosen people. And God proved that to them over and over and over again by performing insane miracles that we read about in the Old Testament. Things like sending a bunch of nasty plagues on Pharaoh to make his people go, parting the Red Sea, no big deal, feeding them with manna and quail that literally fell out of the sky, and making water flow from rocks just so that they could stay dewy in the desert. The list goes on. You'd think they'd seen enough to be secure not only in their own identities, but also in the fact that God always had their backs as he escorted them out of Egypt and right to the edge of the promised land. But that turned out not to be the case, right? Because when Moses sent 12 spies in to check out the promised land, 10 of them came back and said, impossible. There are giants and fortified cities and bears. Oh my, we can't do this, God. And then they said something that explained it all. They said, we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes and also in theirs. The theirs was the giants that they had seen. Notice they didn't say that the giants told us we were like grasshoppers. They just said we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And then they projected what they thought about themselves onto the giants. This false identity is what kept them in the desert for 40 more years, until that losing mentality died and all who carried it. This reminds me of a Dartmouth scar experiment that happened in the 80s, when participants were told a professional makeup artist would come in and put a realistic, visible scar on their face, somewhere on their cheek or their forehead. The participants saw that scar in the mirror before they went into a room to socialize with people. But what they didn't know is that the makeup artist actually was, when they were touching up the scar, actually removed the scar with some moisturizer. So the strangers they met actually didn't see a scar at all. Nevertheless, when the study's participants came back, they reported things like, people were staring at my scar. They treated me differently. And things like, I could tell they noticed it. Even though there was literally nothing on their faces. That study goes to prove that how we perceive ourselves impacts our experiences in life far more than what we actually are dealing with in reality. Because when we think we're scarred or we think we're not enough, we act and we believe it too. So who does God actually say that we are? I know you guys know all this, but it's really good to remind ourselves. Because affirmations and props from your friends and even self-hype just don't do the trick. So here's a quick primer and a reminder. We are chosen. He chose us first before we ever chose him. We are unconditionally loved. There's nothing that can separate us from his love. We are called by name. Isaiah 43 says, I have called you by name. You are mine. That's personal. That's not generic. That's right. This is the most important stuff, y'all. That we are intimately known. He knows the number of hairs on our heads, like Dan says, however many we may or may not have. And he has our names engraved on the palm of his hand. And his love is everlasting. It's not temporary. It's not conditional. It's everlasting and it's immutable. It never changes. These truths are the bases of our identities as God's masterpieces. But you'll never actually believe it. I mean, you can say it all you want and amen it, and I appreciate the talk back. Thank you. But until you're ready and willing to embrace and believe what God says about who you actually are, and God won't force you. Remember that. He's given us free will. Each of us actually has to choose for ourselves what we believe about our identities. So the $1,000,000 question that remains is, are you ready to step out of your false identities? Are you ready to step into who you truly are? I hear a little yes, but I'm going to say it one more time because I want to hear everyone say yes. Ready? Are you ready to step out of all of those false identities, all those defeated identities, so that you can step into who you truly are, who God says you are? There we go. Thank you. So let's talk about how we do that. First, we start by acknowledging that Satan is a lying liar who lies, and nobody's immune to his lies. Satan even tried to come after Jesus. Remember when Jesus was fasting in the wilderness for 40 days? Satan was bold enough to come up to him and say, if you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. But Satan knew full well who Jesus was. He just wanted to see if he could get Jesus to question it and disobey God. But notice what Satan didn't say. He didn't start by tempting Jesus to sin. He didn't say, man, aren't you hungry? Why don't you make yourself a nice little lunch out of those stones? Nope. He just went straight after Jesus' identity, knowing that if he could get Jesus to doubt who he was, he would get him to fall out of perfection and into sin. Obviously, perfect Jesus, God in a bod, as I learned in Sunday school, didn't fall for Satan's lies. But the fact that Satan targeted him means that we should expect him and be ready for him when he comes after us. And when, not if he does, we've got to counter his lies with God's written and revealed truth. As it says in John 8:32, this is my life verse, then you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. This is so important, ladies. If you leave with nothing else today, leave with this. You have got to know the truth, or you will fall for literally anything that Satan tells you about yourself. The number one reason Christians are deceived is because so many of us are biblically illiterate. Here's some facts that'll shock you, maybe make you laugh, but they prove that I'm right. 60% of Christians can't name 5 of the 10 commandments. Fewer than half of all Christians can name all 4 gospels. This one's bad, y'all. 12% of Christians believe that Joan of Arc was Noah's wife. Ouch. Over 50, I know none of those people are in here. I know. Over 50% think that Sodom and Gomorrah were actually husband and wife. 50%, over 50%, I can't, blows my mind. And get this, a full 1/3 of self-professing Christians actually think that the Sermon on the Mount was preached by Billy Graham. Given everything that I just read, is it any surprise that we are totally confused about who God says we are? Because you can't defeat Satan with affirmations you read on an Instagram meme or anything that someone says up here on stage. You can only fight back the way Jesus did. He said, "It is written." There's no feelings or emotions or explanations involved. It's just plain and simple recitation of the truth. So dust off that Bible, re-download that Bible app, and read God's word. Memorize it and marinate in it. And once you've got it deep down in your soul, speak it over your life. Because the Bible says the power of life and death is in your tongue. And we either speak life or death over ourselves, depending on the words that we choose. Now, this was a hard lesson for me to learn. I told you I was raised by a tiger mom, so speaking life doesn't actually come naturally to me or to any other Chinese person I know, for the record. Growing up, my mom used to try to motivate me by telling me that I really wasn't that smart and that I could really afford to lose a couple of pounds. She wasn't being mean, honestly. This is just the Chinese way. I internalized her criticism, though, and repeated them to myself. I'd think, why can't I do anything right? What's wrong with me? How stupid was that? So naturally, Satan had a heyday with my identity, and I was his partner in crime. These beliefs became so deeply ingrained that they ruined in me, in my head, that they ruined the most important aspects of my life, my health, and my relationships. Since my mom always called me chubby, I internalized that belief and identified that way, even though I wasn't. Until the first semester of college. You guys know where I'm going, right? When I discovered fluffernutters. Do you guys know what that is? Oh yeah, okay, for those of you who don't know, it's 2 pieces of Wonder Bread toasted with peanut butter and marshmallow fluff, and it's basically crack. I didn't know what they were. I tried them in college and I was hooked. So most people gain, the freshman 15 over the course of their first year in college, the freshman 15, right? It's like a year-long endeavor, but I'm not most people. I gained the freshman 30 in the first semester. All because I identified as chubby. I basically talked myself into gaining that weight by internalizing everything I'd heard about myself growing up. It became my identity, and my behavior aligned with it, even when I was 3,000 miles away at college, and nobody was telling things. I didn't have my mom there with me telling me anything. Another example of a lie that I was told growing up is that all men are cheaters. Have any of y'all ever heard this? And that it would just be a matter of time before I figured this out for myself. This belief system made me a loser magnet, someone who attracted all the wrong guys. Until one day, right after I turned 40 and I was lamenting my pathetic relational life, a friend/life coach, because everyone in California is a life coach, quietly came up to me and she said, "Can I help you break this habit?" I said, "Sure." She said, change your language and you'll change the kind of guys you attract. Well, this sounded like a bunch of woo-woo, new age nonsense to me. But you know what? It wasn't. What she said was not only spiritually, but psychologically sound as well. It's called identity shifting. It's actually like a strategy that you can use that places old behaviors that you no longer want to repeat in the past tense while claiming the new identity in present tense. You see, my brain defaults to actions matching whatever you say and believe you are. So changing your self-image automatically changes your behavior. I mean, it's so easy, right? Just change what you say. So then she said, stop saying I date losers. Now say I used to date losers, but now I only date amazing, godly men. And when I started doing it first, I have to admit it felt like a lie. Because I pride myself in being a realist. You know, I deal in facts. And my fact pattern, as evidenced by the tear-stained words in my journal, was that I only date losers. But I faked it till I made it. And I spoke life over myself. And I got a corresponding identity shift, which led me to choose the amazing husband that I've been bragging about all morning. He's the best. He's back there. He has a brother, but he's taken, sorry. It turns out James Clear is right. Real change only happens when you shift who you believe you are, not just what you try to do. Oh, now this is my favorite part of the talk. So now that we've learned how to change what we believe about our identities, we've got to do our part to make the new beliefs stick. And because old habits die hard, you got to burn the ships or it's too easy to float back to those old identities. It's kind of like throwing out your old going out clothes. You guys are going to so understand this. I could never say this in a mixed group, okay? This is a women's only talk. It's kind of like throwing out my old going out clothes after I got serious about Jesus. Those clothes no longer represented who I was, and keeping them in my closet honestly just made me feel a lot of shame and regret about the choices I made when I wore them. So listen closely. You're not going to hear this in a pulpit, but it's 100% true. Jesus wants us to replace our old clothes with new ones. He really does. After all, he's the one that invented shopping. And here's biblical proof that it's true. In Matthew 12, Jesus talks about this empty house that's got a demon in it, and the demon's cast out, and it leaves this house orderly and empty. But since nature abhors a vacuum, the empty house is susceptible to a reinfestation of demons that would leave the house way worse than it was before. Now let's apply this lesson to our closet analogy. I love the closet analogy. But instead of demonic spirits, we'll just say that our closets were filled with clothes that were previously too tight, too short, and maybe a little too low cut. Possibly even a pair of 6-inch platform stilettos that you might have worn once upon a time at a club. Maybe that's just me. When we cast those clothes out of our closet, it becomes empty, orderly, and clean. All the remnants of our past life have been tossed or donated to Goodwill. Hopefully tossed. And because this closet is now sitting empty, it has to be filled again. I call this the dangerous middle. It's where we're empty and clean, but we're looking to be refilled, and we have to choose wisely. That's why it's critical that we replace, this is so important, ladies, we have to replace our old shopping, write this down, you have to replace your old shopping habits with new ones, unless you risk going back to Forever 21 in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. How does this happen? How do we end up at Forever 21 again? It's because we know everything about that store. It's familiar, it's cheap, it's easy, and it's in every mall. So in order to break this curse, we have to replace our old shopping habits and renew and upgrading them by taking our cute selves to Nordstrom. And then we have to reinforce those new Nordstrom habits by going back a lot. Scripture basically says this when Jesus talks about new wineskins. You can't just put new wine in old wineskins, or the old skins burst at the seams. Well, the same thing goes for our identities. You can't put those old mindsets in places that no longer align with the truth of who we actually are. And that, my friends, is a classic example of how my mind thinks. It's Denise's standard version of scripture, and it always ends with, let's go shopping. Let's see. Oop, almost there. Babe, can you fix that? There we go. So before you jump online and start looking for new clothes, don't tell me I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm going to share the practical things I've done that help me make a shift in identity. You know, I invest in my body and my health all the time by hiring trainers and nutritionists and joining a gym and working out. And we should do the same thing with our minds. So there's some of the things that worked for me. I love talk therapy. It helps me verbally process what I've experienced in the past, and it exposes the lies I believe about myself. I love group therapy because it makes me feel just a little less crazy, and it's a little more fun to do stuff like this, like the hard work in a group. EMDR uses neuroscience to rewire trauma in the past so I can defang and decommission anything that once shaped me. Life coaching, you know, we got a dime a dozen in California, come on out. It helps me think about how I respond to life in the future. And finally, maybe most importantly, y'all, and I grew up Baptist, I became a Pentecostal a little later in life, but deliverance and healing ministry helps me address the spiritual roots of everything that plagues me. When you get the Holy Spirit to cast out everything from Satan that doesn't belong in your mind or body, you can send it right back to hell where it started and where it belongs. Another tactic that I use to help me stay anchored in my God-given identity is to get rid of people who try to reinforce what Satan says about me. It's called setting boundaries. And as a natural people pleaser, this one was hard. Church culture got me so confused. I thought that loving my enemies meant letting people in who weren't deserving of having access to my heart. But once I learned the truth, that boundaries were actually not only right, but scriptural, you know, the whole guard your heart thing, everything changed. I learned that nothing could be more loving than drawing firm boundaries around my heart to protect my peace, my purpose, and most importantly, my identity. These two books changed my life. I was actually forced to read Boundaries when I was a missionary because I had to share a room with so many girls and a bathroom with 15 other girls as an only child. So I had to learn about boundaries. And then that 12 Christian beliefs that can drive you crazy, it's just game-changing. So take a picture of that, buy them, read them, you'll love it. So I feel like I've given you a lot of homework, right? Read these books, look these things up. But I guess that comes naturally to someone who was raised by two teachers. Seriously, though, getting this identity thing right, it's not for the faint of heart or for the lazy, because getting it right requires us to run a race with perseverance, commitment, and focus. Hebrews 12:1 tells us to run, not walk, run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Meaning we're called to run, again, not walk, run, but only in the lane that God has called us to run in, not in someone else's. So how do we do that? Well, Hebrews 12:2 very handily tells us, by fixing our eyes on Jesus. Because it's 100% true that wherever you focus is where your mind and body go. Just ask any kid whose parents try to teach them how to ride a bike. My dad always said, look where you want to go, kid, not where you don't. But I was a slow learner, and I stared at the only pole in the middle of the playground, and guess what? Out of all that space, I managed to hit it. See, Jesus wants us to be way smarter than I was. That's why he tells us to fix our eyes on him. And when we do, we experience the incomparable joy of knowing we're exactly who God created us to be. So I'll end where I started today. by encouraging you like my husband encourages me all the time. And right before I stepped on the stage, he said this to me: always and only be you. And you know what? Everyone else is already taken. Thank you.